Good morning. It is so good to hear the chatter, but it's good to hear someone playing the piano that plays music that sort of grabs us by the soul and says, okay, you are here now to do something special in this building of worship, and I welcome you to Shantz Mennonite Church this morning on a crisp November morning. It's beautiful out there. I mean, I grew up in Manitoba. Well, it's nice there today, I did check, but it's not normally this nice at this time of the year. We're very blessed to be here. We have visitors, and we're so glad that you're here with us today, and if you need to know anything about our building, ushers are at the back to help. Quick one, washrooms out the back that way, nursery right here. We have folks watching virtually, worshiping with us virtually this morning. Welcome. We trust that God's blessings go across the ether to you as well. Thanks for our tech team for helping us to do that. We have a special guest this morning, David Yancey. Part of his family was here last night giving us an inspirational musical program. It was just wonderful. We look forward to hearing God's word from you later on this morning. May our time of worship this morning be exactly what it is that each of us needs in our journey with Jesus, meeting us right where we are, giving us the healing, the peace, the energy, and the insights that we crave. There are a number of announcements that need to be highlighted, and I'm going to start with something that's been missing for a couple of years in our congregational life, and that is the Adult Fellowship Christmas Banquet. We're going to have it this Christmas, December the 8th. It's a Friday at Schmittsville Restaurant in Wellesley. I think you know where that is, and if not, you can ask somebody because most of us do. And so we'll be selling tickets. I'll be at one of the stand-up tables at the back by the gym windows after the service, and potentially again after Christian Ed time, to get your names. And tickets are $30 a piece. Be there sometime after 6 o'clock in that Friday evening. Meal will start at 6:30. There's special entertainment, which shall remain secret at this point. But consider that, and tickets are limited, so don't delay if you really want to come. I would invite Henry to come and share something as well, please.
As part of the CAFL team, which is TJ, myself, Chad, and Sarah Hunsberger, Chad Spalding, we also would like to highlight this Friday's games night. We try and do this once a month. Goes from 7 to 9:30 on Friday. We will celebrate birthdays. We will have cake and sing for people's birthdays in October and November. And from 7 to 7:30, we always do a gathering game, and we're going to try something new. We're going to try a game called Humbug. We tried this at church camping, and it was a lot of fun. So basically, someone will hum something, and then the rest of us will guess. Don't be afraid if you're not a hummer. You'll just have fun with it. But I thought we would try one. So I'm going to hum something, and it's harder to hum than it is to go da da da. And Stephen is insistent one must hum, which means the lips are touching. So here's my song. Shout out if you know the song. Hockey Night in Canada, very well done. So Brian, if I could have picked who would get that one, it would have been Brian. So if you thought that was fun, come out on Friday 7. That game will happen from 7 to 7:30. So if you're late, you will miss all the humbugs.
Thank you, Henry. The elders team is beginning a new initiative, and it's related to providing care to those in distress or need. The freezer in the multi-purpose room fridge is now designated for storing frozen meals that can be given out as required through the elders and Pastor Kendall's discernment. We would request that anyone who'd like to donate frozen meals to do so as you're able to let us know exactly what's in there by labeling these contents, whether it's vegetarian, gluten-free, pork, chicken, beef, etc., just so that we have an idea. Because sometimes somebody comes to see Pastor Kendall, it's something that's just happened, it's dire, they're in distress, they don't know what to do. And sometimes, you know what? why don't you take this home and prepare this and just have a meal and just, so that's the kind of thing we want to do, okay? It's not to provide ongoing meals for somebody. That we would like to do that too at some point if needed, but this is more for emergencies and that type of thing. So if you think you could be of help, that'd be awesome. We say thank you in advance. And our elder team consists of Pastor Kendall, Bob Good, Susan Berge, Edith Shantz, and myself. After the service this morning, everyone's invited to have a coffee, a cider, a tea, or a hot chocolate just back over there in the atrium, or snack, before the Christian education hour begins. That's at 11 o'clock exactly is when that's supposed to start. So parents of children aged junior kindergarten up to grade 4, please take them downstairs at 11 to sign them in as part of our Safe Places protocol. And then at 12 o'clock when Sunday School Christian Ed is over, please go back down and sign them back out before you take them home. Thank you for cooperating with that. It helps keep everyone safe. For adults and junior and senior youth, we have a guest speaker. Our Christian Ed time will be about creation care. So our own Robin Landers will introduce that at the time, and we have a guest speaker, Matt Tyson from University of Waterloo, to talk about that. So let's make sure we be here for that. And then finally, in terms of announcements, for those of you who like to have your tactile things stimulated while you're listening to worship and worshiping, we have a coloring table back there and a puzzle table back there. And that's for all ages. If you would like to kind of just do that while you're worshiping, that's okay. I would invite you to take your Sing the Journey book out of your pew in front of you. Worship Resources number 119. Sing the Journey is the green book. 119, and let's read this responsively. Let all who are thirsty come. Let all who are hungry come. All without money, come, buy, eat. Drink what is good, and delight in the Lord. Let's pray. God, we come to you this morning with the anticipation of something special from you. Some of us have hearts that are full to overflowing and want to give you the worship and adoration that you deserve. We expect that you will bless us with energy and joy that we can share with those that we meet in the days ahead. But some of us have hearts that are breaking. Sadness, loneliness, and emptiness fills us. We could barely get here today. We are seeking a sign from you that we are not alone. You've said in your word that you are with us. You will not forsake us. So we come looking for evidence of that. And then there are those of us that are just here today because that's what we do on Sunday mornings. And we know that we could use a spark to ignite our passion for you again. God, as we worship together, singing, praying, sharing, may those of us whose hearts are full listen to the nudgings of your Spirit to interact with those whose hearts are hurting, those who need a spark. May you bless those interactions with each of us getting what you know we need. And will you please accept our worship this morning as our thanks and love for you because of your love for us. Amen. Let's sing some praises.
Good morning. Our first song we're singing is 495 in the Purple Book, Voices Together. And I sure didn't know what today was going to look like outside, but verse 3, mine is the sunlight, mine is in the morning. Let's stand together as we sing this song. Thank God for this day that we can come worship him. 88 is Praise to the Lord, the Almighty. Verses 1 and 2 are, well, for you, there's, in the book, there's 1 and 2, and then over on the other pages, verse 3 and 4, if you follow in the book. Let's sing this together. songs are what David has asked us to sing, and the one is Count Your Blessings. This is one that I grew up learning, and we'll sing it. It's a little small, but we'll try.
God has blessed us, individually as a congregation in so many ways. If for some reason you would like to give a monetary donation today, there is an offering plate at the back of the church there. Many of us do our offering givings online. It's a newer technology, obviously. God takes it all and appreciates it and uses it to his glory. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, our Savior, Redeemer, we come to you with hearts filled with gratitude for the abundant blessings you give us each day. We acknowledge that cheerful giving is not an obligation, but it's a joyful act of worship. Help us to understand our giving is an expression of our deep love for you and our want to further your kingdom here on earth. Please accept our gifts of time, talents, and money as a thank you to you for these blessings that are too many to count. Amen. Our guest speaker today is David Yancey. He grew up he's a native of the Baden area here. His father, for those of you who might know, was Clint Yancey, the auctioneer. So that may help you place kind of where he fits, okay? In the last 35 years or so, he spent it as a pastor of Glen Ridge Bible Church in St. Catharines. He's now retired. I'll let him fill in a few more blanks as he comes up to talk, but he is going to bless us with a message in a bit. But right now, I'd invite the kids to come forward for children's time, and he has something special. I guarantee it. David, please come. Blessings to you.
Last night, while children were coming, I did something really different. Dad gave me an old-fashioned magic trick thing, and I did that. But usually I just use ordinary objects. Okay. Ordinary objects. But I might need my hands to do this. So I'll try to yell if I can't hold the microphone, all right? There's an ordinary object right there, a balloon. All right, hang on. Excuse me, I've got to do this. Hi. All right, you got everybody. And here's another order, 10 cents, right there, 10 cents. Now I am going to show you something that you have never, ever seen before in your life. In fact, these people, these older people, they've never seen this either. Never. I promise. Unless you've seen me do this before, nobody has seen what I'm going to show you before in your life. And some of you have lived a long time. I'm going to take this dime. I'm going to put it in this balloon. And grandmas and grandpas can do this because grandchildren love to see this. You can put the dime inside the balloon. Don't get a black balloon or a dark red balloon or a purple balloon. You got to get one of these balloons that when you blow them up, you can see what's inside, all right? So here we go. When I put that dime in there, some of you who are closer can see that. You see that dime? All right, good, all right. That's about, I don't want to break it because I don't like that balloon breaking. Anyway, I'm going to tie it. There we go. Now, this is not meant for people who are sitting like Mr. Right there at the back and with his wife Ruth. They make good soup, but they can't see this because they're too far away. But you can see it. What I'm going to do, here goes what you've never seen before. Cool. I've heard cool already. See what's happening? This is like, what's it doing? It is spinning around and around and around and around. How about that? How many have ever seen that, a dime going around and around inside a balloon before? Yeah, I thought I had you. Now, why would you want to know anything about this? Well, if you just think about it, there's other things that go around in circles too. Like, for example, it kind of feels like the sun does that. It gets up in the morning, goes across the sky, and goes down at night. And then it does it again the next morning, right? You know why that is? It's because the earth is spinning, just like that dime is spinning. That's what makes the sun look like it's moving. We're moving. You know how fast we're moving? How fast we're spinning? We're spinning at the equator, 1,000 miles an hour. Now I came up here in a hurry this morning because I was almost late last night, but I wasn't going 1,000 miles an hour. That's how fast we're spinning this earth. Isn't that fast? That's fast, right? But there's something else. This earth that's spinning around and around and around on its axis, it's going around the sun. It's going fast around the sun. Do you know how fast it's going? 67,000 miles an hour. What? It makes you dizzy? Anyway, just think, and there's all kinds of other things, like the spring comes, and summer, then fall, then winter, then spring, then summer, then fall, and going around and round, year after year after year after year.
But how do we not get this?
Yeah. But just think, what happens if it were to stop? You know what would happen? Terrible things would happen. Terrible things would. Now, I know. What happens if I take my hand off this thing? No, well, let's just see. Well, we got to catch it. Uh-oh. Do you know what the Bible says about this world spinning? All of creation going on. So beautiful, we don't even think about it. Even though we're spinning around and around and around, the Bible tells us in the book of Colossians that the Lord Jesus not only made the world and everything in it and us, it was made for Him, but He holds it. He keeps it going. He does what my hand does. Sometimes I can practice and it doesn't look like I'm doing anything. Like somebody say, how is that dime going all the time? Well, it's because I'm doing it with my hand. And it's the same thing with this world, with everything. And if for any reason our world would come, stop. You know what? Scientists tell us rocks and oceans would just fly with momentum all over the place, and the whole landscape would be scoured. Terrible. Aren't you glad that the Lord Jesus doesn't stop? So today, He is holding everything together so that we can come to church. And we can live. And we can have a beautiful day. I was going to show you something else, but I'm not going to do that. Not right now, because our time is up. But you think about that. The Lord Jesus is blessing us today because all of the creatures and everybody here can live because He is holding it, keeping it going. He's keeping it going. All right. Thank you so much. Lord bless you. That'll be it. Good.
Good morning. My introduction to church began as a young girl, being invited with my sisters to Vacation Bible School at Kitchener Mennonite Brethren Church. That led to Sunday school and later to youth group activities. The seeds of my faith were planted and nurtured in me through the people running these programs and by many faithfully praying church members. Now, just in case you're worried that I'm going to take you on a long 50-plus year journey through my church experiences, be rest assured that there's a point, and I will try and be as brief as possible. Fast forward to 1994. With 2 of our 3 children already born, we moved to Nunavut. The loss of connection and church family was huge for us. In the beginning, we felt very isolated without family, friends, and our church for their support. 4 years later, we moved to Steinbach, Manitoba. All in all, we managed well in the Arctic, so we thought moving to a community made up of so many Mennonites and German-speaking people would be a walk in the park for us after all the cultural and language differences that we had navigated in the past 4 years. We were sure we would quickly feel right at home and find a church family to call our own. We couldn't have been more wrong. After visiting nearly a dozen churches, we gave up and settled on one. We struggled to feel welcome, to feel that there was a space for us. We felt many of the churches were social clubs that we just didn't fit into because we didn't have the lifelong history. The few people that we felt welcomed by knew what it was like for us because they had once been a newcomer and could remember how it felt. In 1999, after only a year in Manitoba, we decided to come back to Ontario. Before moving to Wellesley, we rented a house in St. Agatha, and our kids began attending North Wilmot Public School, which was located across the street. I did not relish the thought of having to go through the process of finding another church. However, I dutifully made up a long list of Mennonite churches in the area that we would start going through. We thought, why not start with the one across from the kids' school? The first time we attended, I was on alert for some of the same cliquish attitudes we encountered in Manitoba. However, we were blown away by this little church that contained some of the friendliest and most welcoming people I could have imagined. Back in the car, we asked the kids, at that point 7, 5, and 3 years old, what they thought of Shantz. They could not contain their excitement as they talked over each other about the next Sunday being Bring a Friend Sunday, and how we are now their friends and we at church, so we have to go. We agreed and drove home to the kids high-fiving about going back to Shantz church the following week. I ask you, what parent doesn't want their kids so excited to go to church? The Bring a Friend Sunday did not disappoint and was an opportunity for more wonderful fellowship. I'll never forget being one of the last families to leave as we sat and visited for such a long time with Henry and Karen Winter while our kids played. What really captured my heart was this community of believers that seemed so tight-knit and at the same time had their arms wide open to welcome newcomers. I went home and threw away the list of other possible churches and never looked back. A few months later, at a potluck and while talking with Pastor Jim Laptison, I mentioned that it would be nice if there were a midweek kids event, and did the church have something like that? He turned to me and said, I think that's a great idea. Why don't you start it? I was astounded that just like that, the ball could get rolling, and by fall, Kevin Hunsberger, Carla Richards, and I started Kids Club. Just like Kathy mentioned last week, it is amazing how quickly you can get involved with the great activities here at Shantz. Earlier, I talked about the seeds of faith being planted in me when I was young at my former church. And I was so happy to be able to have the opportunity to do the same for others through Kids Club, VBC, Sunday School, and Junior Youth. And as my children grew, they have benefited from the strong children and youth programs and the love, prayers, and energies that others poured into them. Shantz Church has a wonderful way of making strong intergenerational connections that I have not ever been a part of prior to attending here. As long as I live, I will never forget when I became a member at Shantz. Everyone was in a big circle around the sanctuary holding hands. All of us that were joining the church were in the center aisle. One by one, we were called by name by someone in the circle, inviting us to come, join them, that there was a place for us. The circle was opened and made wider to fit us. It still brings tears to my eyes today, 23 years later. There was space for us. God knew what my heart needed. I love this church family. You have been a support and strength to me in the good and the hard times. When Nick left and later divorced me, I would not have held up without Jesus and the prayers, love, and support I received from my church family. I said I would be brief, and by now I'm sure I've failed to stay within my allotted time. So for the other dozen reasons why I'm a member here at Shantz, you'll have to come and ask me personally, and we'll have a longer chat. So for now, let me end with this last comment. What I have so appreciated about Shantz Church is the willingness and the intentionality to take things to God in prayer and to listen before making decisions. Does that mean we always get it right? No, we're not infallible. But there is a real sense that I get here that egos are checked, everyone can contribute in some way. A servant attitude is in place, and Jesus is our cornerstone.
Amen to that, Katie. Thank you. Jesus is our cornerstone. Our scripture reading this morning comes from the book of Psalms, Psalm chapter 40, verses 1 to 5, and I'm reading from the Message. I waited and waited and waited for God. At last he looked. Finally he listened. He lifted me out of the ditch, pulled me from the deep mud. He stood me up on a solid rock to make sure I wouldn't slip. He taught me how to sing the latest God song, a praise song to our God. More and more people are seeing this. They enter the mystery, abandoning themselves to God. Blessed are you who give yourselves over to God. Turn your backs on the world's sure thing. Ignore what the world worships. The world's a huge stockpile of God wonders and God thoughts. Nothing and no one compares to you, God. I start talking about you, telling what I know, and I quickly run out of words. Neither numbers or words can account for you. Word of God, word of life. Thanks be to God. Blessings to you, David, as you come.
Well, it's truly an honor for me to be here. And on behalf of the rest of the family, may I just say a big thank you to the congregation, and specifically to Doug and Ruth. Ruth makes wonderful homemade soup, by the way. We now have the recipes. But thank you so much for the invitation to come and speak this morning, and congratulations to all of you on this beautiful, beautiful building that you call your home center of worship, and it's just really wonderful too. So anyway, when Doug first bumped into Doug, I guess it was in May, up at Chesley Lake, and our family used to go up there all the time when I was a little guy, and just loved Chesley Lake. And so since it's their 75th anniversary, I think this year, Wayne Ropp called me and asked whether I'd come back and speak again as a part of that celebration. It was a real honor to do that. And then we met following service, and he asked whether there's a possibility of me coming back. At least he called me about a week later, and he told me that he wanted me to give the same message that I gave at Chesley Lake. So that's interesting. But I remembered D.L. Moody said this: if a sermon is worth saying once, it's worth saying more than once. So that made me feel real good. So Chesley Lake, here we go. But anyway, coming back to Baden is the same. I have the same kind of dynamic in my mind that I had when I went back to Chesley Lake, in the sense of reflecting. My mind is just flooded with all kinds of my memories when I was a kid here in Baden. And many of people ask now, how many here knew Clint Yancey? Let's just see any hands here. Okay. Wow, a good number of you here. Well, last night, same thing. That was my dad, and everybody knew the auctioneer. And so we lived here in Baden, across from the cheese factory up that laneway, just up from Petsnick's Garage, and we lived there until I was, I had my first year finished at Waterloo, Oxford, and then our family moved to Kitchener. And then life became distant from being at Baden. But coming here, the memories of things, I'm telling you, I just am flooded with all kinds of wonderful memories of my childhood growing up. And when I was in Baden, the population was 940. 900. Now you have your own Tim Hortons. Now you have made it. You have made it if you have your own Tim Hortons, I'm telling you. But anyway, so I've got many memories, but all of a sudden, life goes by fast, and here I am old and retired for 4 years. You know, I remember being at Glen Ridge when I was 35 years of age, and an older lady came up to me. It was my birthday. And Emma came up to me. She always cleared her throat when she had something really to tell me. And she said to me, all right, now that you're 35, I'm going to tell you something. And I know what she was thinking of in retrospect. She was thinking of that Psalm 90. That's the one that Moses wrote, the only psalm that Moses wrote. It tells us in Psalm 90 that life is like 80 years and 10. And if you're strong enough, you might add another 10 on there. But 80 years and 10 is pretty well life. That's 70. So she comes up and she says, Pastor, now I know, now that you're halfway through your life, I want to tell you something, that it gets easier for the rest of your life because it's downhill all the way. I laughed as she laughed. Now that I have made it past the grace mark or whatever that is, I'm 72 now, I'm saying, okay, I'm not sure, Emma, whether it gets easier or not on the downhill. I don't think it gets easier on the downhill. Now when I come to my Bible and I read it every morning, I usually just read a chapter at a time, not because I'm trying to prepare something, or not that I'm thinking about presentation now. Now it's just kind of for me. And when I came to Genesis chapter 39, this is the story of the Old Testament Joseph. Remember Joseph, the coat of many colors? Reading it slowly, I stopped. It said, now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, but I stopped after that, taken down. Now Joseph had been taken down. And I reflected on how today people are still taken down. I don't know whether somebody here has just recently been taken down. But Joseph was taken down. Not easy when you're taken down, is it? You can be taken down many ways, but I just had to kind of have that in the back of my mind as I was walking through, again, the story of Joseph, the passage that I've walked through for many, many years. I mean, I've been a pastor for over 42 years. I know this story well. But this phrase jumped out at me. And I thought, I'm going to just kind of make a few observations about this Old Testament Joseph, and maybe how he was taken down. And if you remember the story well, you remember that Joseph was the favorite by Dad. That's why he got the coat. We read that story, I think it's in Genesis 37. Yeah, it's in Genesis 37 about how Jacob, or his name was Israel by that time, how he made this coat because he loved Joseph. But the rest of the brothers knew that Dad liked Joseph best. Not a good family dynamic, by the way. And it tells us in the text in Genesis 37 that his brothers hated him. In fact, it repeats it. And then of all things, Joseph comes out telling his brothers these dreams that he's had about the sheaves and how Joseph's sheaves of grain stood up and all the other sheaves bowed down to him. And then it got worse because he had another dream. Another dream about the sun and the moon and then the stars, the 11 stars, like the 11 brothers, and they all bowed down to Joseph. And it says that not only did they hated him, but they hated him all the more. They hated him all the more. It kept going. They hated him all the more. They hated him all the more in the family. You know, I went to seminary in Chicago, and I remember way back in those years listening to the radio station, and they were talking about all of the murders in Chicago that year. And they said that 95% of murders in Chicago were domestic murders. That means within the family. 95% of the murders were in family structures. And these brothers, in fact, as we go through that story, we know the story well enough to know that not only did they hate him more and more, but when they saw him coming, they said, let's kill him. Let's kill him. Let's just kill him and then kind of make up a story about the animals, killing them. And Oh, Reuben says, oh, no, let's just throw him in the old pit there. It doesn't have water. And then the Ishmaelites came along, and then finally, I think it was Judah that said, well, hey, let's make a little bit of money on the side. Let's not kill him. I mean, after all, he's our brother. Let's make some money, sell him as a slave to the Ishmaelites. They were on their way down to Egypt. Good idea. Everybody vote. Yes, let's do it. So he was taken down by his family, by his brothers. And you know, that's one observation that I make, is that sometimes family hatred can take you down. Family hatred. Where I've seen that happen is usually when mom and dad or die, or sometimes wills come around, and all of a sudden there's this dynamic. You know. Oh. Jesus tells us in probably the greatest sermon that was ever given. He said, it's in Matthew chapter 5. And it says that there it's anger. Anger is in the context, don't be angry with your brother. And it's in the context where he's talking about murder. Well, in 1 John 3:15, I think it is, the Apostle John says that if you hate your brother, you are a murderer. And that's exactly what they hated him. And they plotted to kill him. But hatred in the family will take you down. And it did for Joseph. That's one observation. Well, we know the story well enough to know that when he finally arrived as a slave down in Egypt, we make another observation, and it's this observation, at least I made this observation, it's this, that people have a tendency to be liars. People have a tendency to be liars. So do you remember the story? He was taken down by the Ishmaelites, then he was sold again to Potiphar. The Egyptian guard, he was the captain of the guards. He was the captain of all the guards that were in charge of what was called, they were actually literally called the guards of the slaughterhouse. For those people who were in the pit or in prison, because of the Pharaoh, because of whatever crime committed, they ran the risk of being executed. And Potiphar was the captain of all the guards that took care of those prisoners. And Potiphar bought Joseph, and it sounds like things are going pretty good, because we read about that story just in Genesis 39. And all of a sudden, Potiphar sees real possibilities in this guy Joseph, and so he kind of gives him jurisdiction over all of his whole household. But it's not that great after all. It doesn't last that long, because of course we know the story of Potiphar's wife, who says, "Wow, here comes Mr. Tall, Dark, and Handsome," right? In fact, the scripture says that. He was good in stature, and he was handsome. And she started to plot how to seduce him. And he refused. One time, nobody was around. Potiphar was gone, servants were gone, and she grabbed him and said, "Come on, you come with me into the bedroom." And he fled. He left his coat with her. He fled. He lost his robe. But you know what? He kept his character. He did. And when he took off, it angered her. And she conspired. And she changed things and contrived a lie. And she screamed at the top of her lungs. And the servants finally came around. And she said, "This Hebrew that Potiphar's brought in here, he tried to. And when I screamed, he took off. But look, I have his garment." And she lied. She tried to cover up. That's what a lie is, of course. You cover it up. You speak an untruth and you cover it up. And Potiphar's wife has a tendency to lie, to cover it up. Lying can take you down. But before I get to that, I have to tell you a kind of a fun story, lighten things up a bit, you know. From last night, I left Kay's. My wife her name is Kay, and she's got some gift books that she's made, the devotionals and all of the photography work, they're all from Kay. She's just started. She used to nag me about, why don't you get a camera, Dave? Why don't you get, I said, I don't like to take pictures. Anyway, she got one, and of all things, she started, and books are a result. The second book that she did, called Safe in a Hard Place, it has a picture of a little girl on it. The rest of the scene is kind of dark, big tree, but Livy is this little girl, this beautiful little girl. She's a granddaughter. For those of you who may have been at the concert, Carissa's daughter, our youngest daughter who sang last night here, the one on the end, the taller girl. And Livy has an older sister, Chloe, and one day they were up in Chloe's bedroom and they were having an argument. Mom, Carissa, my daughter, finally got up to the bedroom and said, hey, what are you girls fighting about? And Chloe said, well, Livy is saying things that aren't true. She's lying. So Mom looks down at Livy. Now, you got to keep this in mind. This little girl at this point in time she's not even in kindergarten yet. She's about ready to start kindergarten. She said, Livy, do you lie? And Livy looked up at her mommy and said, well, more than I should. Do you know what? Even as a little girl, there's something in the human nature so that when we get to be old and we lie, it's not quite as cute, it's not quite as funny. But what it does is it takes people down. And with Joseph, literally, that's what happened, because her lie had Potiphar take Joseph down and place him in the pit, in prison. Same prison that all the other criminals were in. Lying takes them down. Well, in 5 minutes yet, I can do this. When he was down there, if you remember the story, after a few years, there were 2 men also put in the prison. And by this time, Joseph had earned a bit of credibility so that he was helping out, you know. But in the same place where Joseph was helping out in this prison, this hole, there were 2 men. There was the butler and the baker, or the cup server. The one who actually gave the Pharaoh his wine to drink, and often they were so well trusted that the cup server would make sure nobody put poison, so he would drink the wine first before he gave it to the Pharaoh. But for whatever reason, Pharaoh was upset with both this cupbearer and this baker, and they both wound up in prison, and Joseph happened to be the ones that were attending to them. And one night, they both had a dream, and they told Joseph, they were so distraught about this dream, they didn't know what it meant. But they told Joseph about this dream. The cupbearer, as Joseph said, well, God gives the interpretation of all dreams, but I'm going to tell you what it means because God has given this insight. And he proceeded to give the good news to the cupbearer that in 3 days he would be returned to the Pharaoh and he would live and he would serve again. And the baker said, oh, this is good. Okay, Joseph, this is my dream. And the baker had these buns and on a basket, and he was going to serve the Pharaoh, but birds came along and took all the buns. He didn't know what it meant. And Joseph said, in 3 days, Pharaoh will lift your head, and you will be no more. And you know what happened, just like that. But before the cupbearer went, Joseph said something very interesting to him. And see if I can find it here. He said, when things are going well, here it is, verse 41 of chapter 40. But when all goes well with you, remember me. Joseph is talking to the cupbearer. He says, remember me, and here it comes, and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this prison, out of this hole. He's been there for years. When it's going well for you, show me kindness, will you? Mention me to Pharaoh. The way that chapter ends,
The very last verse, verse 23 of chapter 40 of Genesis. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. He forgot to be kind, as Joseph had asked. And that's the final observation I make. People have a tendency to forget how to treat one another, how to be kind. Did you know that in the book of Romans, this is another thing that jumped out at me. I've gone through the book of Romans how many years? But in Romans chapter 2, it tells us there. Romans chapter 1 is basically addressing to the pagan society, the ones that have replaced the Creator with the created. They bow down to the created. They bow down to the sun, to animals, to a rock, to a log. They replace the Creator and think that the created is something they should be worshiping. That's Romans 1. But by the time you get to Romans 2, now we have people that are pretty spiritual. So they look at others and, don't do that. And Paul says in Romans chapter 2, they have failed to realize something. That all those people that they're pointing their fingers at, that they are guilty of the same things. But they're pointing their fingers. And they have failed to remember, to realize the simple truth. It's in Romans chapter 2, and I believe it's verse 4, that it's the kindness of God that leads people toward repentance. They've forgotten. It's the kindness of God that leads people to repentance. I close with one story. I'm almost embarrassed to tell you this story. But by the way, I'll tell you the story. I'll tell you the story. I frequent Tim Hortons quite a bit. And one day in St. Catharines, I was in Tim Hortons and Grantham Plaza. If some of you know St. Catharines, you know exactly where it is. It's on Scott Street. And I had placed my order. I think I ordered a coffee and some kind of, maybe it was a muffin, maybe something. Anyway, I was waiting for my order. And so I stepped aside, as you usually do, and the place was filled. And this lady comes in. She was obviously a homeless lady. She came in loud. She didn't care. She came in loud. She looked awful. She came right up to the little girl behind the booth and she said, I want to buy coffee. You don't want to serve me, but I got money. I got money. I want coffee. And I sat there waiting and I looked at her and everybody in the whole, it stopped and they were listening. Yeah, I want coffee. I don't know. And I got money. You probably don't want to serve me. People don't like to serve me, but I got money. And I found myself thinking, oh my goodness. Looked at the little girl, she was terrified. She was rough, she was abusive, she was loud, she was coarse, she was obnoxious. And I started thinking to myself, what happened to this lady that would make her like this? Anyway, I got my order. And I left, and I couldn't get her off my mind. And I got in the car. And I couldn't get her off my mind, And I said, Lord, she just needs you. She needs you. She needs a transformed life. That's what she needs. And I didn't hear a voice. I don't hear voices, but I had an impression. That's what I call it. I don't know what else to say. It's just you have a thought. And I've learned over the years, you get a thought, pay attention to it. Sometimes I've messed up. I haven't. But I could not shake this thought, and the thought was, she needs somebody to be kind. Well, if you were here last night, you'll know that one of the kindest things you can do is give somebody a gift. I mean, that's the way God was with us, right? We spit in his face, but he gave us the gift of salvation. That's a gift. It's a gift. And of course, since my wife has, for the last couple of years, done these books, they're gift books. And I had
them in my trunk of my car. I got in my car, and I thought I could give her a book. No, I'm not going to give her a book. I started the car up, and I drove out of the parking lot. My impression was, Dave, you should give her a book. You should give her a gift book. I didn't want to give her a gift book, but I couldn't shake it. So I said, all right, Lord. Now, 7 or 8 minutes had passed by this time, all right? If she is still there by the time I get back there, I will give her a gift book. I just didn't want to give her any gift book. I drove back, round the block, I came back in Grantham Plaza, pulled it in parking lot, sat there for a minute, got out, went to the back of the trunk, took, I don't even know which book it was now, put it in an envelope. And I walked into that Tim Hortons, looked around. Oh, good. She's not. Looked in this corner. There she is. All by herself, you know. Nobody around her. Nobody around her. Nobody around her. Sitting there with her coffee. I went over and I smiled. She looked at me. I said, I have a little gift for you. For me? I said, yeah. I said, it's just a book. It's just a book. Really? Yes. I said, here, you can have it. She took it out of the envelope. She put it. Oh, I couldn't believe it. Oh, she was like, it was like there was a dog. She was petting this book. Just petting this book. I said, I hope you enjoy it. And I got out of there. Man, I thought about that. But I thought of that verse. Kindness leads toward repentance. And we have a tendency not to be kind. And I know how I struggled to do that. Because I don't talk to people like that. But you know what? What's happened is every time I drive by or stop now, and somebody is there and homeless, and I don't know who they are, and I know how I used to think. But you know what I do? First back up. On my way home, I was praying for her. I was praying for that lady. Lord, help her to read it. But I figured anybody that would do that to a book, she's got to go inside. She's got to read it. She thought it was so precious. But it's not just her I pray for. Now when I see a homeless person, I pray for them. And I think of her. And the story is too long, but I'll say one more thing and then I'm out of here. It's my honest prayer that maybe just maybe one day, I mean, I've got more years behind me than I have ahead of me, right? That's the case, that's the way of life, right? But maybe, I hope, maybe one day, when I get to glory, some lady with a smile, cleaned up, sweet, changed, she'll come up and she'll say, you don't remember me, but you gave me a book. And the person that's been changed is me. To learn how to just give a little kindness. Because we tend to forget how to be kind. And that takes people down. Takes people down. Thank you for the honor of just being able to share a few thoughts. Sorry for going too long. Bless you.
Thank you. May we all follow your example. So, page 419 in the book is Great is Thy Faithfulness, another song that Dave has chosen for us. And then I tried to fit them in where I thought God is faithful when we are faithful, or he's faithful all the time, and we can be faithful back. Let's stand together as we sing 419.
This time we want to say goodbye to our online virtual worshiping friends. We want to give you a blessing as you go. May the Lord Jesus bless your soul and strengthen your faith. Let this hour of worship grow within you and bear fruit, which will remain for life eternal. May we together praise and glorify our God forever. Go in peace.
I do. Sure. Yeah. For sure. Yep. Anyone who's interested in, is this even on? You can't hear anything here. You can't hear anything. How about that? That any better?
Okay, you have a mic kind of for out here yet? Let me, is it coming through? Is it coming through? That's not coming. Let me, there we go. Let me invite you to come on in and join us for the adult Sunday school time as we talk together with Matt Thiessen about sustainability and creation care. So I invite you to come on into the sanctuary for some conversation. This is the hard part. Well, you know, there's coffee and conversation. It is a good distraction. They do come in eventually, but yeah. So if we, we're just gonna close the doors here. There you go. Just close the door behind you here. Welcome to come on in too for the conversation. Oh my goodness. The doors are closing. Come on in. They're beginning to come in.
All right. I see a few more friendly faces coming in, so I'll give another moment. Okay, so thanks those of you who are here for Adult Ed to talk about sustainability. It's my pleasure to welcome our presenter this morning, Matt Thiessen. Matt is a lifelong resident of Waterloo Region, and he lives in Kitchener with his wife and daughter. Matt is the Director of Sustainability at the University of Waterloo, where he works with numerous departments and groups to support the campus's sustainability goal setting, planning, and implementation. He has led the development of the university's sustainability strategy and climate action plan. He supports numerous projects and initiatives that save energy, reduce waste, engage students and employees to be part of the change, and weaves sustainability across the university's curriculum and partnerships. Matt completed his Master of Arts degree through the Balsillie School of International Affairs, and his undergrad degree was in Arts and Business with a joint major in History and Religious Studies. Now, as if his day job doesn't keep him busy enough, Matt remains committed to many community-led sustainability initiatives as well. He serves on the board of directors for what was formerly called Community Car Share, and he has volunteered in multiple committees for the development of Waterloo Region's Climate Action Plan, Transform WR. Is Transform WR is how it's, okay. Okay, so all right, Matt, if you want to come on up, actually, wait, there's more. Matt is also the chair of the City of Waterloo's Sustainability Advisory Committee. So like you take this eco-enviro sustainability thing pretty seriously, it seems. You got a lot on the go. And I guess if I can shift to being a little bit more serious myself for a moment, I suppose that considering how much we've all been hearing for so many years about how dire the predicament is that humans have got themselves into with overconsumption and environmental degradation and the global warming, climate crisis, and so on, it's perhaps more of a wonder that we all collectively as a society haven't taken this all as seriously yet as we really need to. I've heard several of Matt's presentations at the university. I know that we're in for a very well-informed presentation this morning. I'm sure that will help us all develop more understanding of the facts of the matter, why we should care, what we can do about it. And there will be time for a discussion and questions afterwards. So Matt, please, I'll turn it over to you.
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much, and I'm really honored to be here today and get the chance to connect with you folks. As Robin shared, I've been at the university since 2015, and I worked at a nonprofit for a few years before that, looking with lots of different organizations on how they can reflect on this idea of sustainability, what it means and how we can make it part of our business, regardless of what sector that you're in. So for today's conversation, I just want to go through 4 different topics. First of all, this idea of sustainability. What does that mean? What are we talking about when we say that? Why should we care? I think that's going to be a big part of the discussion is what's the big deal and what should we then do about it? What's the point and why should we take action? And then I'm going to leave with some conversation on what's happening at the University of Waterloo, just as a kind of case study of how we're approaching it as an organization. And I'll note before I start that I think one of the things about sustainability is we have to talk about and cover a lot of different topic areas. So climate is one of them, but many other areas, and my job isn't to be a deep disciplinary expert in every single topic that we covered. I'm not a climate scientist, I'm not an energy engineer, I'm not a transportation specialist, but we have to have a sufficiently broad knowledge of all of these different topic areas in order to kind of think about that holistically. So happy to answer questions throughout as well. I want to, engage you all throughout the conversation. So maybe before I start, when I say the word sustainability, what is the first word or phrase that comes to mind for all of you? I'm going to ask you questions as well throughout the discussion. So, yeah. Ongoing viability, right? Resiliency, I love it. Solar. On the roof, I saw them coming in, that's brilliant. Yes? Well-marketed term, yeah. I actually saw a statistic a while ago that it was increasing so much. There's a Google thing where you can track the usage of a word over time, that it would actually, it's on an asymmetric, or asymptotic, sorry, rise, that it would overtake every other word in the English language by like 2030. So yeah, it's been used in a lot of contexts. Future, awesome. Yeah, yeah. Awesome. Conserving for the future. Great. When I ask this questions to students in class, some of the things that we hear a lot is like planting trees and recycling. And these kind of behaviors that we're engaged with or that we're presented to or even trained on sometimes that touches on sustainability. And I think you'll probably not be surprised. There's no like uniformly accepted definition of what sustainability means. I think you're picking on all sorts of different pieces of it and how we reflect. So I start every conversation about sustainability thinking about it in terms of 3 circles, and I'm going to walk through those right now. This is the first one here. Does anybody know what this is? Obvious answer. Earth, yeah. Not so obvious answer. Does anyone know this specific image of the Earth? From the moon? Close, very close. Nope. Very close. Yeah, exactly. So this was the first high-resolution color image that we had of the Earth from space in its entirety. Just based on like where the angle of the sun was and everything, we always got bits and pieces of it, or part of the Earth was in shadow because of the angle of the moon, etc. But this was back in 1972 on board Apollo 17, one of the moon missions. And it was, again, this first time that we got to see the planet as a whole. It does. Yes, yeah, agreed. Yeah, and this was at the dawn of the sort of modern environmental movement in the early 1970s. There had just been the first global conferences talking about the environment, bringing countries together. This is actually one of the most widely reproduced images in human history. It's called the blue marble. And I think there's really two things that are significant about it. One, it's pretty, for sure. It's also very fragile. We look at this and we look kind of, I don't know, frail. We're this tiny little marble in a huge expanse of black. There's nothing else around us. So it catalyzed this idea of sort of spaceship Earth around the time, that we're this lifeboat in a kind of pretty inhospitable universe. And the second piece is there's only one. There's nothing else hiding background in the shadows. If we mess this one up, we can jump onto lifeboat B. So there's no other Earth. And I think this was really important. What do you think this represents? More than one. Yeah. Yeah, very close. If everybody in the world lived the way that Canadians do, we would need more than 5 planets to sustain our livelihoods. So this is adding up all the land we use, the resources we consume, the pollution we create, the water we use, et cetera, et cetera. All these things kind of aggregated together. And this is an estimate. Of course, it's very difficult to calculate this, but when we stack all that up, suffice to say, we're using a lot more than what we can on a single planet. What do we think this represents? Not quite. Close, you're getting there, I think. Yeah. This is the global average. So still way more than one planet, but I think what's really critical to understand on this, is there's people around the world who live in absolute poverty. They don't have access to fresh water or energy or many of the things that we take for granted in Canada. So when we talk about sustainability, I think it's important to recognize it's not just an environmental issue. It's not just about the planet. It's also about how we agree to use and access and consume and be a part of the planet. So it's a social equity in addition to environmental challenge. So why, if that's that first circle, looking at the Earth as a whole, why are we at that? And we're in this phase for the past 50 or 60 years where human activity across the planet has actually exploded. And if we take a read through any number of statistics, you can't probably see the language on there, so I'll just read out a few of them, but everything from population to water use to paper production, international tourism, telecommunications, transportation, GDP, all of these things about human activity have exploded over the past 50, 60 years in the post-war environment. And on many areas, that's been a phenomenal boon. Life expectancies have gone up, the average standard of living has gone up, we've been able to do more with the resources that we have, we've lifted people out of poverty, and I think those are all objectively good things. But they come with a consequence. And the consequence is that we also have this impact on our ecological systems. And again, tracing through almost any global or local ecosystem kind of indicator or metric, we see whether it's the amount of land we use, the amount of tropical forest we've cut down, shrimp and fish that we harvest, chemicals in the atmosphere and in our soil, all of these follow that similar trajectory. That the more we impact the planet, these things are kind of running up with us. And this leads us to our second circle, which is our idea that eventually we run out a little bit of headroom. That the planet can take a lot, but there's only so much that it can provide and absorb as we do it. And this is a framework called planetary boundaries. And it's this idea that there's these major global systems, some of which we hear about in the news all the time, like climate change, but then also not so, or maybe ozone depletion. If you were around in the 80s, you saw the big scare around how, oops, we poked a hole in the ozone layer with some of the chemicals that we were releasing into the atmosphere. We've actually solved that through regulation and through good governance at the global level. But there's all these different things, the amount of land that we use, the chemicals that we produce when we use things like fertilizer and put that into our ecology, into our ecosystems, whether that's land-based or water-based ecosystems. And all of these things, when we add it up, this is a scientific framework saying, as we start knocking these down, it actually becomes harder and harder. There's cascading failures across our systems. And so The nice thing about this is that we don't have to get to zero on all of these. There's always going to be some type of human impact on the environment. Any species has an environmental impact. It's about how do we shape ourselves to live within this, they literally call it a safe operating space for humanity. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so I won't go into detail. All of this is public, but basically that wedge of the pie here is basically biodiversity. So this is the diversity of species across the planet and how many we're losing every year, largely due to human activity. So species come and go all the time. This is not anything new. We didn't start that. They evolved long before we were here, and they will evolve and disappear long after we're gone. It's the rate of change that we're seeing right now that's scary. And depending on where you look and what systems you're looking at, it can be anywhere from 100 to 1,000 times the sort of normal rate of species extinction and evolution. So that's one of the things that's really scary, is how fast we're changing this. And in some areas, you can see like large mammals around the world. We've destroyed like 85 or 90% of those populations. Even bugs and other things like that, just the diversity of species is declining. And from a resilience perspective, for whoever that said before, that means that the species that are remaining are at very high risk. They're very fragile. Those ecosystems are not able to withstand shocks. And things like food systems that humans rely on that depend on that biodiversity also come under risk. So again, I'm not going to go into detail on each one of them. I think there's entire programs of study that we have at the undergraduate and graduate level at the University of Waterloo that touch on some of these wedges. So we're really only skimming the surface here. But suffice to say, we're beyond those planetary boundaries in many areas. One that I do want to draw a little bit of attention to is this idea of climate change, because we hear it a lot. And one of the challenges with climate change is it's also an accelerator for all those other pieces. It makes all those other things harder to solve when we have a climate that's out of whack. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the change in global temperatures for roughly the last 100 or so years. The darker or the more red the bar, the warmer the overall global temperature. This looks different around the world. In fact, in Canada and at higher latitudes, we actually warm faster than the global average. The mid-latitudes and the equator, they tend to warm slower just because of the way energy moves across the planet. But we've seen this increase of about 1.2 degrees Celsius over the past 100 or so, 150 years. 1850 to 1900 is when they usually set the beginning of that time frame. That doesn't sound too bad, right? 1.5 degrees, it's a little bit warmer on a Sunday afternoon or something like that for us. It can be enjoyable. At the global level, though, that's huge. That's a massive amount of energy that we are not sending back to space, essentially.
Another degree in the Caribbean for hurricanes does make a difference.
Massive difference, yeah. I don't know if any of you saw the news yesterday, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but Taylor Swift had 2 concerts over the weekend down in Rio de Janeiro, and they are going through, I think it was 50-something degrees Celsius heat. One person died from heat stroke, and they actually canceled the second concert. That's unprecedented in terms of the number, or in terms of the severity of that heat wave for Brazil. But this is what we're more likely to see as a result of that. And on the right-hand side of this line, this is what we're expecting to see in the future. Depending on what our actions are, it's going to continue to get warm, and it's just a matter of how warm it gets. And I'm going to talk about in a sec again why we should care about that. So for the average person, this was a cool graphic that was in one of the last global climate reports, but if you were a child born in 2020, the type of temperature range you're going to see over your lifetime. But even for someone like myself, who was born in 1988, I'm still likely to see all of this in my lifetime. It's going to happen very quickly, and it's going to be a big thing. And the science behind this is phenomenally complicated. Again, I'm not a climate scientist, but this comes from the field of geophysics, physics, biology, chemistry, all sorts of different ways of understanding our climate that's aggregated together to get an understanding of what's happening. Why are we seeing the changes that we have right now? What are we likely to see in the future? There will always be uncertainty with those answers. And the problem is uncertainty isn't usually our friend because there's lots of things that can be ambiguous or be worse than what we actually thought they would be. And the last circle that I want to look at is this idea, again, combining these environmental systems with our social systems. This is a framework called donut economics. It's from an ecological economist named Kate Raworth. She's a British ecological economist and does lots of different advising to countries and organizations around the world. And it's, okay, we take these planetary boundaries that I just shared, but then we also recognize we want to lift people out of poverty to that 1.7-ish planets that I showed before. This isn't equally distributed around the world. How do we make sure that everybody has access to clean water, to clean energy, to clean air, to food and everything else that we need to live a basic good quality of life, plus things like healthcare and education and all the services that we think are important for us as a society. And this is the idea of this social, sort of a social floor. If we have the ecological ceiling, what is the minimum amount of resources, land, water, et cetera, that we need in order to provide a good life for what is currently 9 billion, soon to be 10 billion, or 8 billion, sorry, soon to be 9 billion people around the world? That is a huge question. And that, I think, is really the essence of sustainability. How do we take these massive global systems and these massive human systems and make those things work together? Because the further we push out on it, the more difficult it actually becomes to meet those basic human needs. And that's where I want to ask a question from all of you. Why should we care? So what? It's the planet. What are your thoughts? Yeah. Absolutely. The next generation, generations of people that we are leaving this to. What are they going to face? Other thoughts? Robin?
Social justice point of view, wealthy people may have the means to cope with the difficulties to come.
Yeah.
There's a huge number of people in the world who suffer immensely.
Yeah. There's a justice issue. There's people that can, with lots of money at your disposal, you can weather any storm, right? And then there's lots of people who don't have those resources, be they financial or otherwise, at their disposal to manage this. And in the area of climate and ecological collapse that we're seeing, it's often the people who are least responsible for causing the problem that are also going to suffer the most from the impacts that it creates. So it's a double whammy on the justice side. Any other thoughts?
It's what we've been instructed to do. It's what we've been told to do.
Through a faith community, you mean? Yes. Amazing.
Our earth and use our resources.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, these are all great points. And I want to reflect on this because I think in the sustainability world and in the climate world as well, we've done a really bad job talking about this. We've talked a lot. We've had 30 years of very public debate on things like the science of climate change. Is it happening? How much is it attributed to humans? What's that going to look like? You've probably seen, when you've seen presentations on climate change, bar graphs of things like carbon dioxide emissions and temperature and all these other things. And that's actually been quite effective because most people, surprise, surprise, actually understand that. We hear lots of different debate in the world about it, and that's fine. We're never going to get 100% certainty. But if we look, and there's this fantastic program out of Yale University in the US that does all sorts of surveying of people's opinions on climate change or their understanding of climate change. And the map here shows the number of adults, or the percentage, I should say, of adults who understand that global warming is happening, who believe that global warming is happening. And basically the redder or the warmer the color, the larger the amount of agreement. So basically anything over like red, orange, yellow there is a majority of people. And if we look across the entire United States, that's 72% of people agree with that statement. And the US is actually one of the most polarized countries in the world on this question. So, you know, we're not in a bad spot. Most people actually understand that global warming is happening. Who are worried about it? Again, a pretty sizable majority here, 71%. Yeah, I'll get to that in one sec, because it asks lots of questions. Yeah, so do you believe global warming is happening? Pretty significant majority. Do you believe global warming will harm future generations? Again, pretty significant majority, 71%. Do you agree that it will harm people in developing countries? Pretty significant percentage. Do you agree that global warming will harm people in the United States? They did actually ask questions, and I apologize that I didn't put it in here, on whether you believe humans are causing global warming, and it is a significant majority. It's a little bit lower, I think it was high 50s or low 60s percentage, but again, most people still agreed with that statement. And for different reasons. They asked, do you think it's from fossil fuels? Do you think it's from this, from that? And so there is consensus on that. Where things start to shift really significantly, all of these maps are warm, yellow, red, orange, across the board in almost every electoral district. So these are actually different electoral districts across the US, and you can see whether it's a red state, a blue state, a significant majority on all of those statements. Now we ask the question, do you think it's going to impact you? We lose that majority everywhere. Red states, blue states. It's going to happen to someone else, somewhere else, at some other point in time. Why should I care? Why should I vote on that? Why should I pay for something different than what I'm doing right now if I don't think it's going to impact me? Maybe that's ruthlessly selfish for us to think about, but that's how people make decisions a lot of the time. And on the same question, do you think it's already impacted you? Again, very low percentage of people. And this is not unique to the US. This is also true in Canada. So same question, again, we don't have as good data as what the Yale survey does, but we had some that was done out of the University of Montreal. So this is every single riding across Canada at the federal level riding. And it said, do you think the Earth is getting warmer? Again, more than two-thirds, we're at 83% of people in Canada accept that statement. When we ask, do you think it's caused from humans? Again, two-thirds majority of people agree with that statement. Do you think it's happening to you? Boom, we lose that majority everywhere. Or do you think it's going to impact you, I should say, everywhere? And I think that's the story that we failed to tell, why it's important. And it is. It's impacting us today. Our grandkids and our kids are certainly going to experience that to higher degrees than what we have, but there's little warning signs, sometimes really big warning signs that are popping up all around us as we speak. And this is what I want to talk about, the why we should care, because it's hitting us already. This is a chart of insurance claims across Canada over the past, 1983 to roughly 2020. So these are weather-related insurance weather-related insurance losses, and the yellow bar graph there is the average in terms of 10-year rolling annual average. So we're seeing this increase of extreme weather. That's exactly what was projected to happen as a result of climate change. And I want to be really specific on the number that's here. This is insured losses. So this means, what is the insurance company actually paying out to a homeowner when their basement is flooded? That doesn't mean what was the actual damage that's as a result of that. Usually insured losses are 40 to 60% of the total damage coming from extreme weather. So that means that homeowners or businesses or whoever else's place has been damaged as a result of this extreme weather are still on the hook for something at the same time that insurance is going crazy trying to cover the cost of these things. So if you want to have an understanding of how bad climate change is, go talk to an actuary in a property insurance company. You'll get scared really quickly. And they see that. They see that in the claims, and this is adjusted for inflation and purchasing power and all those other variables as well. And just look this past summer. This is a chart of our wildfire burn that we experienced in Canada. Those gray lines at the bottom that you can hardly see there are the historical averages, and we're just way off the charts in 2023. And that average has been creeping up slightly. We haven't seen that bad in Canada, but Western US, I should say not in this part of Canada, but BC and Alberta have been experiencing this for the better part of a decade, and we're just starting to see it hit home here. We wore masks some places earlier this summer, not because of the pandemic, but because there was wildfire smoke with really bad particulate matter that was in cities across the continental US and North America that reached over to Europe. They had poor air quality in Europe because of the wildfire smoke in Canada. And then just a few weeks ago, you might have seen the massive hurricane that hit Acapulco in Mexico. This was just unprecedented almost in its severity. These are the bottom lines here were the projections of it staying roughly at a tropical storm level or maybe going up to a Category 1 hurricane. It accelerated from a tropical storm to a Category 5 hurricane in 12 hours, just because of the amount of energy and the heat that was in the water just off the coast of Mexico. And it made 200,000 people lost their homes. Parts of the city are still without power and water today, weeks later. And this is what we're likely to see more and more of. And that's scary. And these things, these extreme weathers, events also translate to lots of stuff that is not, it lasts far beyond when that thing happens. I don't know if any of you have seen, but right now the Panama Canal, so one of the major shipping and trade corridors in the Western Hemisphere, is actually not able to send ship traffic through or is limiting ship traffic because the lake that feeds that in the middle is so dry that the ships are bottoming out, or there's a risk of ships bottoming out if they don't manage that very carefully. So we depend on a lot of these ecological systems to be functioning the way that they have for the last 50 years, and when they don't, everything from international trade to food systems, things like property insurance. How many of you have seen your home insurance go up over the last decade? I have, yeah. I moved into my house in 2013 and I'm paying a lot more now than I did then. The average cost in Ontario is 60% higher than what it was a decade ago for home insurance, and that's almost exclusively because of the payouts on extreme weather. In Alberta, it's 140% because of the wildfires and the flooding that they've seen over the last decade. That's hitting us in our pocketbook today and will continue to in the future. And in parts of the US, there's actually places where you can't even get property insurance anymore because no insurance company is taking on the risk. California, Florida, Louisiana, whether it's hurricane, wildfire, et cetera, they're just saying, you know what, there's no premium that any property owner wants to pay anymore that's gonna cover the potential risk that we have to absorb to offer those policies. So that's a massive, massive economic risk now sitting over our shoulders where, hey, that 40 to 50%, insurance payout that you might get to help you get back on your feet, that's not there anymore. And just because of the extreme that we're seeing. And that's the extreme stuff. What actually scares me more is the slow sort of creeping stuff that sort of slips under the radar and we don't notice on a day-to-day basis. And in many cases, this has to do with food and water and just how sensitive these global systems are to really big changes in precipitation and temperature. I know this is a farming community, and so this is part of our lifeblood. We need stable climate in order to grow food and have access to clean water. So 2 winters ago, in the prairies, they had one of the highest issuances of crop insurance payout in Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba history. Just because drought and extreme weather were decimating crops around that whole kind of breadbasket in Canada. The neat thing about food systems is we're a global food kind of integrated market, so when something fails in Canada, we usually import it from abroad or vice versa. And there's this risk increasing of what happens if we hit it, China hits it, the US hits it, all at the same time. There's nowhere else to import the food from. But in this case, we've already seen food prices go up. And an example of that, actually, I'll skip one ahead here, olive oil prices. If you've gone to the grocery store, they're about 50 to 60% higher now, and it's because all of the Mediterranean has been in a drought. Spain, Italy, Portugal, a lot of the other places that grow this have lost their olive oil crops, or a significant portion of those for the past couple of years. And what does that translate into? Higher prices that we pay at the grocery store, if you can find it at all. And at the beginning of the pandemic, you probably went to Home Depot or Rona or wherever, Home Hardware, to go get wood. If you wanted to, you would have seen the price of a 2x4 go from $3 or $4 for a, 12-foot 2x4 to like $15. And I think it's still pretty high today. And that's, because people started taking on renovation projects when you're at home and you're not kind of going to work every day. But the biggest driver for that was because we had years of drought that led to pine beetle that just decimated, or years of high temperatures, I should say, that led to pine beetle that decimated most of the forests in British Columbia and Alberta. And we said, okay, you know what, we can still actually harvest that wood down the road, so we didn't do anything about it. But then a year of drought and temperature caused crazy amounts of wildfire that burned all of that kindling of forest. And so it's a ton of things that are coming together to drive prices across the board. And I think that's part of this like simmering things. When was the last time we went to the grocery store and looked at a bottle of olive oil or a a bag of rice and said, holy crap, that's expensive. And oh my God, that's because of climate change. Those two things, we don't do a good job of telling that story, or at least partially because of climate change. And the other one that I want to touch on from a kind of really big perspective is healthcare and the impacts that this is going to have. So this is a graph from the Canadian Climate Institute, and if you can't see it, I'll read out some of the numbers. But it's looking at all sorts of different things that are likely to increase and the healthcare costs associated with that because of climate change per year. So Lyme disease, because of our increasing temperature, the ticks, fleas, et cetera, that carry Lyme disease, they don't die off as much in the wintertime. They're migrating further northward every year. And that's about $100 million a year in increased healthcare costs because of that. If we look at something like ground level ozone, which is air pollution losses, again, almost by the end of the century, about $800 million a year in healthcare costs because of that. Heat-related deaths and heat-related productivity issues, 8.5 and almost $15 billion a year in lost productivity or other things, respectively. And the really big bubble on the right-hand side is just air pollution more broadly. From the burning of fossil fuels, from wildfires, from dust and other particulate matter that gets stirred up when you're in drought. That number is $87 billion a year, all the way up to $246 billion a year in increased healthcare costs across the board in Canada. Like, that's staggering. That is at a huge amount. And just if we look at the wildfires over a small period this June, those already put about $1 billion on our healthcare system costs in Ontario alone, just from those few 5 or 6 days where we're experiencing those really, really high wildfire events. So this is going to hit home, and it's going to keep increasing. Yeah.
So it seems like when people say, you know, how can we afford to transition off the petrochemical-based economy, and how can we afford to change the way we do business and transportation and all that stuff? The question is more, how can we afford not to?
Correct. What's the alternative? What's your counterfactual? If we choose not to do something, what's going to happen if we don't? So, and I'm going to get to that in a sec. So these are, I think, if we want to be really shrewd and focus on impacts to us today, the real ways that these are going to hit home, I think when we kind of take in this kind of range of statistics and what we're likely to see, it tells a pretty convincing message. But that's being kind of ruthlessly selfish, really looking at it from a very materialistic point of view. In and of itself, I think that's convincing. But I love the point that was brought up before, that there's an ethical component to this as well. This is the right thing to do because there's a fairness issue. Who gets the right to pollute? Who gets the right to live in a healthy environment or a clean environment, et cetera? And the people who are going to be harmed most by this, poor people generally around the world, but also in our own communities, are the ones who are least responsible for causing the problem in the first place. They're the ones buying things, burning the least fuel, et cetera. So how do we have that sort of justice issue embedded into this? And then from an intergenerational perspective, as you shared, what about my kids? What about my grandkids? Yes, I'm experiencing this today. They're going to experience it far more in the future. And the thing about climate in particular, but also biodiversity, is once it flips, once you get to that state, it's not as if we can just say, oops, and we change overnight, right? CO2 emissions last in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. And so these are big timescales that we talk about. And part of the reason that we're seeing this is we're accelerating that so quickly. On the bad side, it will take us a very long time to bring that back down if we're not very careful. And then I wanted to add, my major was in religious studies, joint major, as Robin shared in university. And I'm not, again, an expert on any one particular religion, but I think as we look across, and a lot of what I studied was actually comparisons of religion and sort of interreligious dialogue on different topics. And it's amazing that almost every faith out there has some level of understanding of the connection to our ecological, our natural world around us. And these are just, some quotes. And in the Christian traditions, I think it's really difficult because we often talk about this idea of dominion, right? We have dominion over the world around us. And that comes with a sense of ownership or rights or authority or whatever. But I think embedded within that, there's this also idea of stewardship, right? How do we have dominion over something that we've destroyed or plundered or exploited? And so these are just a few quotes, but really, God created this planet that we live on. And different faiths approach that in different ways, but a lot of the times it comes down to this sort of sacred understanding of the world around us. And I think that's a really important lens that we want to bring to this conversation, that yes, we are called to do this. And we are called to create, or to care for creation, but also to care for each other. And I think that's where I'll note here, like this other moral and ethical kind of, what are the values that we bring to this conversation? In the world that we live in today, what defines the way that the world operates, right? If we look at the way governments or businesses or other organizations make decisions, a lot of the times it's driven by these things on the left-hand side. Consumption, more, bigger, faster, better, et cetera. There's this greed element to it. Sometimes explicitly, often implicitly. Arrogance, uncaring for others. These are the kind of traits that unfortunately drive a lot of our decision-making. Individualism, right? We look after ourselves and sometimes forget about our neighbors or our community around us. The socialization of risk and privatization of benefits. What I mean by this is, if I don't have the responsibility of cleaning up after my mess, somebody else will do it for me. And usually that's the broader society, taxpayers, others, or it'll impact somebody else. But then I get to capture all the profit or the benefit that comes with exploiting that resource or that system. And short-term decision-making. You know, it's good for me today, ergo I'm going to do it. And on the other side, I think there's the counterpoints to this in a very different worldview. And I would ask, as we look across this, which values resonate with our faith community the strongest, right? And I think this is true on any faith community. That's not unique to one. I think those values are maybe not universal, but certainly quite common. And I'll leave on this kind of why we should care with this final quote from a climate scientist named Kevin Anderson. He's a director of energy and climate change at the School of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering at University of Manchester. And it's really this understanding that we've gotten to a point now, we've put off action on so many of these issues long enough that we used to be able to have this kind of gentle curve in the way that we changed our behaviors. That's not really an option anymore. Either we make some radical changes to the way that we live, do business, organize our economies, organize our societies, or we're gonna have all of these radical changes that I just talked about forced upon us. And so the idea is there's not really this middle ground anymore. We have to be making choices consciously now. Do we make some big changes that we have control over and can have agency over, or do we let those changes happen to us in a very scary and accelerating way? And that's where I want to shift the conversation, is not all doom and gloom. What can we do? What are we doing that's actually changing these things? I'm going to start with a framework from a group called Project Drawdown. They're a science-based group that looks at what are all of the different solutions that we can have around the world. I'm going to hone in specifically on climate change just for simplicity here, but it's probably true across many different sustainability themes. We've seen the red line, it might be a little bit difficult to see, but we've seen this increase in global emissions for the past few decades, and we've got to radically curve that downwards. And there's these set of solutions, many of which are underway right now, that we can deploy to make things happen. And they break it into sort of 4 different major buckets. The things we need to do today, the emergency brakes that we need to put on that are going to have very rapid, very immediate impact on emissions around the world. And so these are things like changing the way that we do farming and diets, from very, very resource, fertilizer, meat-based diets. That's not to say we need to get rid of that, but that those come with a massive climate impact, and we can be much, much better, much more efficient at the way we do it to have a massive decrease, in emissions. Things like cutting methane leaks in our oil and gas infrastructure. Methane leaks everywhere. It's just part of, when we send gas through pipelines or on ships or anything around the world. And methane is a very, very strong greenhouse gas. It has the warming effect that's about 30 times as big as carbon dioxide. So just plugging those leaks has a huge climate impact. Yeah. Methane for ripening food. Yeah, methane is a gas, ethylene is a fuel, if I'm not mistaken, right? Like you're using that in a different way. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Totally. Yep. Shrink wrapped individually, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it's a part of it. It's a part of it, for sure, yeah. I think one of the other things is, who controls that, right? As a consumer, do we walk into the grocery store and say, okay, what's the options available to me? Is that companies that actually have control over how that's designed? Is that individuals? We can make conscious choices, but only as far as the system allows us to. And I'm gonna come back to that kind of role of individual versus kind of communal action on it, because I think that's important. But if we look at the way that we work and the way that our buildings and everything is set up today, we also waste a ton of energy. Our buildings, our vehicles, everything is very, very inefficient. So Robin was sharing me a few of the design features of this building as we were chatting beforehand, and this is pretty rare. Like, we have a lot of old leaky buildings that with a little bit of work can have a pretty big climate impact. And then we have this whole other push on things that we could be seeing: more renewable energy, industrial decarbonization, building electrification. So this building, again, you don't have natural gas as your heating source. You've switched to geothermal and you're using solar power. These are all major climate solutions that actually have a pretty significant impact, especially in Ontario. And then on the transportation side, things like better transit service across our communities, active and sustainable transportation, like walking and cycling. These are just cheaper, better, healthier, more convenient ways to get around if we build the systems properly to support it. And then vehicle electrification will be a part of that. And another important piece on this, if we're kind of getting into the future, things like education, and particularly in the developing world, maternal rights, maternal reproductive rights, and ways for people to do family planning in whatever way makes sense for them and for their culture. But as we are moving towards 10 billion people on the planet by mid-century, again, that means more and more people competing for fewer and fewer resources. So we have to have a mind to supporting people in making those choices. And lastly, restoring nature. So planting trees, doing things like integrating soil carbon capture into our agricultural systems in a very intentional way. Those have a huge carbon impact over time. And that can actually shift this trajectory downward. And the good news, if we look across so many of these different indicators, we're accelerating this quite rapidly. This is global electric vehicle sales around the world. We're seeing them increase. Some areas, like Northern Europe, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, they're like 30 to 40% of all vehicle sales. I think in Norway it was almost 80% last year. So we're seeing this rapidly increase, which is great. We're seeing a massive increase in the deployment of solar, wind, and other renewable energy as well. The graph here is showing what portion of the global energy mix is coming from different sources. And you can see the blue and the red on the top there for offshore wind and for solar. Just based on the economics of it alone, solar in many parts of the world is already the cheapest form of energy to produce. And in many places, it's going to get even cheaper. Solar in many places of the world is already the cheapest form of energy to produce and consume. There's lots of challenges with it. Sun doesn't always shine, wind doesn't always blow, but even when we factor in those things and we have battery backup or grids that need to connect different areas so we can integrate that over time, it's already cheaper. Not quite true yet in Ontario just because of our latitude, but in parts of the continental US, India, China, solar is the cheapest form of energy available today. That is totally different than what it was 10 years ago. So when we forecast that out into the future, just on that basis, we're seeing a massive shift in what is actually getting funding. In fact, last year, 2022, was the first year where global investment in clean energy outpaced global investment in dirty energy, fossil fuels, gas, and oil. That's massive. And that's the finance world starting to say, oops, these things don't make sense right now, and we're going to invest in this in a different way. I'll share this graphic as well, but we're not on the right trajectory. We're not going fast enough, I should say, or far enough, but we are moving in the right direction now in terms of the investment and the work that's happening across these spaces. So if we add up everything that we're doing across society today, based on what governments have committed to doing, based on what policies are actually in place, and based on actions that are already on the ground, we are seeing movement towards some of the global climate targets that we've set out. We don't quite trust that governments are doing everything they can yet. That's certainly true. And just because they said they were going to do something, that always doesn't materialize on the ground. But we're seeing it move in the right direction. If you had asked me a decade ago, when we add that up, depending on how how much you're trusting the governments, we're anywhere from like 2.5 to roughly 3 degrees is kind of the average that people say we're going to get to. Our global target is 2 and 1.5 as an ideal. But 10 years ago, if you had asked, we were on track to well over 4 degrees Celsius. So even over the last decade, we're making progress, and it's happening today. So what can we do? These are big systems, these are global, but we have agency as individuals. As the person shared, we can make choices in our day-to-day, and they might seem small, they might seem trivial. And I'm not gonna say that us going around and shopping a little bit differently is going to in and of itself change climate change or biodiversity or any of the other things. But what it does do is it sends a signal for other people to pay attention. What is the #1 reason why people put solar panels on their house? Anybody have a guess? Yes, their neighbor did it. It's statistically, once one person puts it up in a neighborhood, it starts kind of like dominoes, other people putting solar panels up. We're social creatures, we do what others are doing. So you taking those small actions echoes far beyond anything that you're seeing the impact of yourself. So amongst your family, your friends, your social network, your church, how can we have those conversations to move this forward? As an employee, every single company is going to be navigating how we deal with climate change or biodiversity or these other topics that we're experiencing. So how do we integrate it into the work that we do? We all have an opportunity there. Every company is gonna have to work with this. And then as a citizen, whether in our voting or the community groups that we're a part of, our neighborhood associations, whatever you want to think about as your civic life and the people that you're connected to beyond your friends and family, sports teams or I don't know, crochet groups, whatever you're involved in, how do we bring that conversation forward? And sometimes that's all it has to be, is a conversation. Because I think one of the things that it's one of those dinner table conversations that we just feel really uncomfortable bringing up, right? That these are scary things, we don't really want to talk about it, it can be a bummer. But that actually kind of goes against us, right? Nobody thinks about it if we're not talking about it. And so how do we make that part of the dialogue, part of the conversations? And I'm gonna end very quickly just sharing some of what we're doing at the University of Waterloo. So we're a large campus. We have about, depending on how you measure, 45,000 students and roughly 6,000 employees that are part of the university community. It's a pretty big group of people that are within the university environment. And if I think, why should it matter to us as a campus? I ask ourselves that same question, and I push other people on campus to ask that question as well. And that's things like, we're training the next generation of leaders in every part of society. Is the engineer that we're graduating in civil engineering, does he know how climate change is going to affect the design of the bridge that he's building in terms of the extreme weather that's going to have to withstand? Does the public health professional that we're training in our School of Public Health understand those health impacts that I just shared? Air quality, new diseases, other things that are coming down the pipeline, heat stress, water stress, et cetera. Does the communications person actually have an understanding of how to talk about climate change so that it's not just greenwashing or fancy marketing, but it's really integrating it into a company sort of portfolio of how they present themselves? And the research that we do on all of these topics is critical as well. We are a knowledge mobilization organization, so how can we be part of that solution? We're also huge. Again, lots of people. We have about 8.5 million square feet of building space across, depending on how you measure, anywhere from 100 to 120 buildings. And we are impacted by things like rising energy costs, rising waste costs, all these different variables that, as homeowners or as other business owners, that also impacts universities too. So how can we be planning for a future where our infrastructure is compatible with the changes that we are likely to see and want to see? And then our students, our employees, they want to be part of the solution. They want to be engaged. And so we have different ways of trying to think about how do we activate students? How do we work with employees to build that in their own kind of day-to-day work? And also these types of conversations. Employees and students are not just employees and students. They're community members, they're citizens, they're colleagues out in the rest of the world. So how do we engage them to go out into the world and play that role? And part of what we're doing is on all 3 of these pillars. In our academic mission, how do we teach, how do we research in ways that accelerate solutions to these problems and understand the problems better? We're knowledge organizations. We should be asking really difficult questions, and we have research institutes and teaching programs set up to do just that. We have a commitment as a campus to be working to carbon neutrality. So again, getting our emissions as a university down to 0, to manage our waste much better. Again, we're a small city unto ourselves, so we have to take this seriously. We move, again, that 40 some odd thousand people to and from the campus every single day. So how do we do that more efficiently? Using transit or walking, cycling, or electric vehicles. And again, how do we engage this massive community of individuals that we have across the campus? So we have a green office program, a green residence program, and we've just launched a green labs program to try and find ways to engage people where they are on their teams on campus. And this is just a bit of a roadmap of how we're putting all of these pieces together, how we're taking this commitment to reduce carbon and trying to break it into meaningful steps. We have, again, buildings that we have to electrify and convert. This can be adding insulation, it can be doing lighting retrofits, it can be doing upgrades to the mechanical and the HVAC systems in those buildings, how we heat and cool them. We also have a central plant, which is basically a district energy infrastructure. So one big building, lots of boilers that pump steam currently out to most of the buildings on the main campus, and we have to decarbonize that. So what are the different technologies? Things like ground source heat pumps, like what you have here at this building, air source heat pumps, solar, that we can start weaving into the way that our energy infrastructure is set up on campus. And then all of these other sources of sort of indirect emissions, the travel that we do for research, the waste that we generate, the products that we buy, even before we waste them and throw them in the trash or the recycling, they have a footprint on how they were created. It's really interesting. I actually did a study of my laptop, and that laptop there that we procure from Dell for the University of Waterloo has about 220 kilograms of carbon emissions baked into it. That's how much carbon it took to actually, greenhouse gas emissions it took to actually manufacture what is less than a 1 kilogram laptop. So how do we use our supply chain? And we buy a lot of technology, paper, other materials across the campus every year. How do we use our purchasing power and our drive to actually work with vendors, work with industry to be better? And even though we're a large organization, we can't do it alone either. We have to work with lots of different partners, from the local to the global, other universities, the business community, government, nonprofits, in order to really accelerate the work that we're doing and that society is doing. So I will just leave it with this quote here, that this kind of is scary, but I love the kind of optimism that's built into this, that if you look at the science about what is happening on Earth and you aren't pessimistic, you don't understand the data. But if you meet the people who are working to restore this Earth and the lives of the poor and you aren't optimistic, you haven't got a pulse. Thank you very much. And I know we're a little bit towards the end, but I'm happy to answer questions if folks have them, and whether that's formally or I can stick around for a little bit too, so yeah.
More of a comment. I had a question at the beginning as you were going down the doom and gloom train and telling everybody where we're at, and I was like, okay, how do we find the balance? Because that's what I discover through our journey of what I do. How do I find the balance of telling everyone the shape that we're in and the trajectory that we're going on, but being able to create engagement and encouragement from where we've come, and finding that balance, because it's very easy to go too far the one way, and there's no way we can do this. There's no way, I can't do anything, why bother, right?
Yep.
But if you don't find that middle ground, you've done an excellent job in this presentation, finding that middle ground, why there is hope and why we are seeing positive things moving forward, so I thank you for that.
Thanks, and I think it's a very difficult balance to strike. Like I sometimes slip too far the other way, where somebody says, well, actually, it's not that big of a deal then, you got it under control. I don't need to do anything, right? No. We've got some big things we need to work on, but it's not all, scary. We have agency as individuals and as collective to decide the future that we want to achieve.
As a community, locally or nationally, what are the biggest roadblocks that are stopping making the change?
Yeah, I think I will share 3. And the first one is this lack of connection that I was trying to say before, that we don't associate climate change or biodiversity or any of these other issues. They seem too big, too abstract. They don't connect to what we understand today. And I think it's really hard. Science communication on this has often struggled to get that across. When I ask people the same question that I asked you at the beginning, what do you think about climate change specifically? The two most common answers are ice caps, rising seas, and polar bears, right? Because that's the framing that the media and others have brought to this topic. They don't necessarily think about flooded basements or food being more expensive at the grocery store. And you know, I saw this amazing quote, and it's been shared a number of times, so I don't know who the original author was, but the quote was that climate change is the one thing we're going to witness on our screens over and over and over again, getting closer and closer until we're the ones taking the video. Right? It's going to hit home. It's hit home already this summer. Yes? Oh, sorry, and to answer your question, the other two pieces, I think, are our economic system, which is explicitly focused on the left side of that chart that I showed, focused on very short-term thinking, literally quarterly profit statements, and if it's anything, even if it's creating value over 5 years, the business community is focused on quarterly, annually if you're ambitious, right? That's a really big problem when we're talking about things that are over decades, right? So I think that time horizon is a big one. And a third one that is, I think, increasingly bad is this idea of misinformation and the role to which different industries, for different reasons, have funded things that are just blatantly lies and continue to do, though, in some really, really corrupt and poor ways. And I'll just give one example. You might have seen recently over the last year or two, there's been conversations about gas stoves and the indoor air quality impacts that they have, especially if that gas stove is not properly ventilated. So putting climate change stuff aside, the idea, I think that the media headline that came out was that in the United States, about 18% of all asthma and respiratory issues are as a result of gas stoves because of how poorly they combust. And even though gas is fairly clean to burn, in an indoor environment, you're still breathing in all those fumes, especially if it's poorly ventilated. And then the entire gas industry started using ratepayer revenues to lobby against the policy and the messaging on this, like just blatant corruption. They were actually fined for doing that because it's illegal. But whatever, it's their business, so they're going to do it. So I think misinformation, our economic short-term thinking, and this inability to make those connections.
Is there any research being done comparing like we have solar and electric car, the resources used to do solar and batteries like cobalt and silica used to make that,
Totally.
comparing that against what resources are used for oil and gas? Is there any research?
I was hoping someone would ask this question because yes, there is. There's tons of it. And when we do life cycle analysis, which is saying from the very start to the very end of a product, how much energy, resources, material, et cetera, does it use? And yes, so for electric vehicles, even if you're powering your vehicle on one of the dirtiest coal-fired grids in the world, it is still better than a gas vehicle, even when you account for the battery manufacturing, even when you account for all sorts of other things. Because yes, they are more material and energy intensive to produce an electric vehicle up front. If we're running it in Ontario or Quebec that has a very, very clean electricity system, we're mostly hydro and nuclear in our electricity, it is like 90–95% better in terms of life cycle emissions for that. The materials question is a fascinating one, and it's not wrong in that, yes, we're going to need to harvest a lot of materials to do this transition. Batteries, not just for vehicles, but also all sorts of other things that we're going to need to electrify. So currently today, I think the numbers are about 100,000 tons a year of lithium that we need to currently manufacture, and our estimates are that will probably need to quadruple, maybe even quintuple, to get to the scale of where we need to be. We extract about 170,000 tons a year of cobalt. These are very sensitive rare earth minerals to do. So full stop, we need to do that properly. We need to ensure there's labor rights, that we're not putting people in terrible conditions when they're doing this, that we're not polluting the environment, et cetera. And there are concerns with that. I'm not going to sugarcoat that at all. Does anyone know how much coal we extract by weight every year? Worldwide. So that's 100,000 tons of lithium, 170,000 tons of cobalt. Anyone have an estimate for global coal production? 8.8 billion tons a year of coal that we extract. About 4.5 billion tons of oil. So just by the sheer mass of this, moving to a renewable powered economy, requires vastly less resources, vastly less mining and extraction. And we have to do that every single year to power those systems. About 30% of all of the shipping traffic around the world is moving those fossil fuels between countries, whether that's liquefied natural gas, coal, or oil. So yes, there is a material intensity to the renewable energy transition, and the counterfactual is how much we need to currently extract in our current system. 2 questions, yeah?
I'm guessing that the effect of the ice caps melting, causing the land to come up, we may be seeing some of the same stuff with all the mineral extraction, that it's not only the gases that are generated, but also the effect on the physical structure that are causing problems that we maybe don't even know about.
In terms of fossil fuel extraction, you mean? Yeah, I mean, the obvious one that's in North America is with fracking and the disruption that causes from a geotechnical perspective. I have no idea whether the weight of that is significant enough to see that tectonic shift, but in parts of Pennsylvania and sort of the Midwest where there has been this fracking boom over the last 2 decades, really, we have seen some geological shifts as a result of that, for sure. Yeah. Yes?
To add to your point on the amount of extraction we have to do, is that batteries can be recycled. There's plants that actually recycle batteries.
Yep.
You can't do that with coal and oil.
Absolutely.
But unfortunately, one company that does it is struggling right now financially because batteries aren't degrading fast enough that they're getting enough batteries in. It's going to be 5-10 years probably till we have a volume of batteries that need to be recycled. But
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's a really good point. I mean, theoretically, at least, a lot of the materials that we do produce in solar, wind, batteries, electric vehicles, we could, with the right economic incentives and systems, set up ways to recapture and recycle those. And in many cases, we're actually already doing it. Electric vehicles, they are probably the most grueling on batteries that you have to be, just because of the performance characteristics that you need. You want your vehicle to be, if it says 100%, I want it to be 100%. I don't want it to be 60%, right? And so batteries, once they're no longer suitable for an electric vehicle, can still be bulked together and used for grid storage or home storage. And that type of kind of use characteristics, they're still very, very well suited for and have long lives. But you're right, even if we actually need to reconstitute batteries back down to their chemical sort of elements, there are processes to do that. Right now they're very expensive and not very efficient, but we could do it. Coal, you burn it once, it's gone, right? It's CO2 in the atmosphere, and then mountains, I mean mountains of coal ash that are, you know, toxic substances. I don't know if you saw a few years ago in Georgia, one of the, I don't even remember which one, but one of the hurricanes hit, and there was these huge piles of coal ash. There's all sorts of safety precautions and everything that they have to have these contained in the right areas. And all of those were breached by rising the floodwaters that came through. And so they're massive, you know, toxic risk for the communities around that. It leached into the water supply, and they're still doing remediation on that today. So in Alberta, you'll see the often kind of the tar sands and the tailing ponds that come out of this. So yes, they're one-time things that we burn, and they have a massive environmental legacy that we're stuck with afterwards. Yeah?
It kind of occurred to me as you're talking and showing the numbers that when we talk about education, maybe the message that needs to be lifted a little more is why I'm at, why I matter, right? I think spiritually, like in churches, we talk a lot about why we matter. In schools, we talk about why you matter. But when it comes to the climate crisis, that sort of thing, it's usually a global vision. It's we're breaking the earth. And you get to this feeling of it's your job to educate 1 million people, or your job to stop all this so that the earth can, you know, and when you show the numbers of, you know, 2/3 of people believe this is an issue, if every one person made a change, then there will be change, right? We talked about the grocery stores and packaging. Well, if everybody just decided, well, I won't get that produce that's wrapped, I'll get this one that isn't, well, companies will stop wrapping them, right? So I think, you know, maybe if it just came back to the why I matter,
Yeah.
that would make a big change.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's what I was trying to get at in that little yellow thing that I said, across being an individual, an employee, and a community member. The one thing you can do, I'm gonna get everybody to close your eyes for 1 second, so there's no guilt involved here, okay? Nobody can see except for me, and I have to just to see what you respond, okay? But close your eyes, and I just want you to raise your hand. When was the last time you had a conversation with somebody on climate change? Or sorry, did you have a conversation with somebody on climate change in the last week? You guys are a phenomenally good group. Usually it is less than, you can open your eyes now. So about a quarter of you, maybe a third, put up your hand. When I ask this to students, when I ask this to employees on campus, when I ask this to any group that I speak on, that number is usually less than 10%. So the only way we make this real is to make it part of the conversations that we have on a regular basis. Yeah, it's not just me up here talking to you right now and then I'm gone afterwards, but how do you carry this conversation? And I think you're gonna find way more effective ways to connect with your family and your friends and your colleagues and your peers than whatever I'm gonna say up here on the stage. So, absolutely. Yeah?
Just firstly, you said 3 things when you were answering the question here, and I would sort of add a fourth, and it would be some of this real partisan political aspects, and I don't expect you to comment on it. But the other thing was, you asked about whether we had a conversation about climate change. And yeah, I had a conversation about climate change, but it wasn't that I...
Not a good one?
And yeah, my conversations about climate change always start with people that are so vehemently opposed and emotionally charged against it. And I was wondering, have you done anything to, like, I can't understand why. I can't understand why there's this strong hatred for electric vehicles, or this strong hatred for...
I think you've hit the nail on the head. Yeah. I actually think it's an extension of my third point with this misinformation piece that I talked about before to some degree. But I think our political systems are incentivized to turn every single issue into a wedge issue, right? Either you're for something or you're against it, and you're designed to campaign on that level. So one of the things that I look, like if we look at my presentation here that I shared, and pretty much any research on climate change or sustainability generally, biodiversity, et cetera, like there's not an ideological bent to this. There are conservative, I mean small c, conservative and small l liberal solutions that can cut across all ideological political ideological divides. And yet, whether we look at, and there's been polling that's done worldwide, this is true, gender, religion, racial, all these other dynamics that we try to see whether there's a difference in the way that people think about certain topics, that's not the biggest driver of whether people do or do not believe in climate change. It's their political ideology that drives that. And that's me versus us, in-group versus out-group messaging on what it means to be conservative, what it means to be liberal, and again, that's not a capital L or a capital C liberal and conservative. This is just, it becomes part of our worldview and our identity. And I think that's really, really dangerous when we're thinking about not just climate change, but also the solutions to it, right? And one of the ones that I know it hits people in the wrong way, and it's a really tough one, but the idea of a carbon price, whether it's a tax or a cap and trade system or whatever, that is one of the most conservative solutions, lowercase c conservative solution. You're using market mechanisms to drive behaviors across all of society, rather than government saying, these are the specific technologies I want you to adopt, these are the specific things I'm going to incentivize or not. That's a very sort of hands-on big government type of approach. And yet, across the board, it's been conservative groups more broadly that have been advocating against things like market mechanisms to address climate change. So sometimes the only way that I can appreciate that is that they just have that wedge incentive, turn everything into a campaign issue, and eventually you box yourself in where you've got no other solutions, because you've sort of talked yourself out of that. So it's really difficult.
What it does is it triples the time frame that stuff needs to happen in. That's what that does. Not having the political will and the drive to do this, it
Correct.
just extends the time period. We don't have the time period to do it. So getting all these parties on board is how we shorten the time frame to make this stuff.
And it's amazing because if you look at the US, and again, this is partially true in Canada, but provinces like Texas, Oklahoma,
These are leading the nation in the generation of wind and solar energy because of their geographic situation. You don't hear, when you think about Texas, you think about oil extraction, right? Alberta in Canada can be an energy superpower in renewable energy the same way that it's an energy superpower in oil and gas right now, if we choose to. But that's a politically motivated, for better or for worse, and there are often, you know, snippets of truth that come into this. Is the transition to a renewable energy economy going to be easy? No. Are there going to be bumps along the road? Yes. Do we have lots of things to figure out? Of course. But those are technological, social, and human things to figure out. And I think we have the ingenuity across society to do that. I would love to see oil and gas engineers doing geothermal drilling, right? They have the ideal skill set and a massive, history of experience to do that kind of work. And we're seeing that happening right now. In the US, they just launched a new deep geothermal program, and everybody at that company has some connection to the oil and gas industry. They're taking the skill sets they applied in a particular context and saying, I can do something better with that. I can provide clean, reliable, low carbon energy. And that's what they're doing. So I think there's tons of solutions out there. The ideological debate is not going to go away. I mean, political ideology, but I think there's ways to ground ourselves in solutions and in sort of shared values that is really the only way you cut across that divide.
I just had one comment about kind of around the idea of caring. I think we are getting to be at a place where so many people spend time indoors, right? On their phones, after work. I'm thinking of students to high school. And we often challenge them with, you also need to care about the sustainability, but you're not going to care about something unless you spend time in it and you know it.
Yeah.
And so I'm worried about, the future generation also not caring. I think encourage them to be outside, get to know what's out there, because if you don't care about it in general, because you don't know it, you're not also going to implement it. And I think students, as much as they recognize there's a problem, they're kind of in the very pessimistic, this is all doom and gloom, because in some ways they don't care. They're not going to care about future health. They don't buy their own food. They don't have to worry about the products or what they're doing to their house. As teenagers and kids, they're just seeing like they expect us to be doing something for their future, number one. So they're just like sad, and they want us to do something because they don't know what they can do.
Yeah.
And they don't really care because they can't make changes that they feel are changing their future. And then I struggle with thinking, how do we help them care for when they need to care, when they're making those decisions? And can we get them outside? Take your kids outside, your grandkids outside, get them to care.
Literally touch grass, right? Get out there, feel nature, and be a part of it. Two comments I'll make on that. One is there's this whole kind of, I won't say movement, but there's this research that's emerging on this idea of nature deficit disorder, that we actually, as humans, there's hardwiring in our brain for lots of different reasons to connect to nature. When we're outside, our stress levels go down, our productivity and the way that we process information improves. All these kind of mental health benefits that come, and physical health benefits that come with spending time outside of nature. So you're right, as kids and as adults, as we're not exposed to that, what are the consequences? And the second piece is, I think youth globally have actually been an enormous boost to the climate movement, particularly over the last 4 or 5 years. You probably remember the global climate protests in 2019, 8 million people around the world across different countries that were marching in support of climate action, and Greta Thunberg and other leaders really leading that movement, but that was largely youth-led, and even only from an advocacy perspective. You might say, yeah, you're naive in terms of the particular solutions that you're proposing, but you push people to think about it in a different way. And I'll speak to our experience on campus. Students, even from an advocacy perspective, push me every day to go further and faster than what we are comfortable or capable or think we're capable of doing as an organization. And so that is an important and critical role for youth to play. And even if just that, and there's other things too, that has been already transformative for climate change.
They're definitely not denying climate change, right? They believe the facts.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Thanks, Matt. One observation I'd want to make is it's almost 12:30, and I can't think of any other adult ed sessions where we've gone a half an hour past noon. That's remarkable. So, and I don't see a lot of faces of people in the room going, I want to, can you wrap this up? I want to get out of here, right? So thank you so much, everyone, for staying. It clearly indicates a lot of interest and concern for the topic. There's something I want to touch on from last week's guest speaker, just before we let Matt go. Last week it was Jack Suderman was here, right, for the Sunday morning message. He spoke about what the role or the purpose of the faithful should be. And if I remember right, he said something along the lines of, it's to show the principalities and the powers what they should be doing. Does anybody remember that? I have that basically right. Some branches of the Mennonite or Anabaptist faith think, can have the notion that we are supposed to be, we are in the world, but we're not of the world. And their reaction to that is to disengage as much as possible. That's their interpretation of how to react to that. But if you agree with Suderman's interpretation, we should take inspiration to engage with the powers and principalities on these kinds of things. Matt mentioned how globally renewable energy is on the increase, but here in Ontario, the most recent government canceled a whole lot of environmental energy stuff when they came into power. Is that the right thing to do? At the back, on the wall, on the door there, I've taped to the wall a list of all the elected representatives for Kitchener-Waterloo, Baden, New Hamburg, from the most local all the way to federal. All their names and contact information is there. If you want to engage with this kind of stuff on the political level, use your high-tech smartphone and take a picture of that page and you'll have all the contact info. I did print a few out. There are like half a dozen printed if you want to pick up a piece of paper. I get the sense people would be happy to hear more, but I'm also not wanting to impose on you too much. So I want to really thank Matt for coming here today, for all the information you shared with us, good and bad. And maybe we all strive to take it seriously, our responsibility for God's creation. So thanks very much, Matt.